Frankenstein is directed by James Whale, and it stars Boris Karloff and Colin Clive. Frankenstein is a part of the Universal Monsters cinematic universe. And yes, cinematic universe existed as early as the 1930s. Marvel were not the first ones to invent the cinematic universe. Though the Universal Monster universe, though being the first cinematic universe, it isn't as well done and put together as the MCU is. This is because cast members were constantly replaced. And as always, this review will contain spoilers to Frankenstein. So if you've never seen this film and you want to avoid any and all spoilers, I would highly recommend skipping to this timestamp so you can receive my spoiler-free thoughts and my final grade on this film. I will also leave a timestamp in the description that you can skip to. But I mean, this film is over 90 years old. So if you've never seen this film and you haven't already gotten spoiled, I assume you're living under a rock. This film was made as a result of the success of Dracula, and because of that, the studio wanted Bela Lugosi, the man who played Dracula, to play Frankenstein's monster, but there are many tellings to why this didn't work out. Some say Lugosi didn't even want to play the monster, and he wanted to play a more complex part like the Doctor, and others say that the filmmakers behind this film didn't think Bela Lugosi's facial structure fit the facial structure of the monster. Whatever went down, I think they made a good decision in choosing Boris Karloff to play the monster. Boris Karloff, of course, nails it as the monster. Despite of him not having any dialogue, he still manages to make the monster extremely menacing just by his facial expressions and eye movements. Also, the monster's character design is just iconic, and it looks utterly fantastic. Yes, this design does go against Mary Shelley's original vision, but I mean, this design holds up so well that it is still used over 90 years later. Boris Karloff just has this physical imposing quality that Bela Lugosi unfortunately just doesn't have. I mean, he's great as Dracula, but the monster just wouldn't have fit him. Ironically, he did play the monster in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. Also, and as a word of warning, I will be referring the Doctor as Frankenstein and his creation as Frankenstein's monster, or just the monster. Most people call the monster Frankenstein. I mean, that's not wrong, because as years have went on, we've kind of labeled Frankenstein's monster as Frankenstein. I mean, the later movies didn't really help, like Bride of Frankenstein and Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, but he was credited in this film as the monster. So I'm going to call Dr. Frankenstein as Frankenstein and the monster as the monster, just to prevent any confusion. I might have created more confusion, but I want to just to, I guess, appease the Frankenstein purists. The movie poster says Frankenstein with little text below that, the man who created a monster. Maybe even as early as this film's release, calling the monster Frankenstein was an issue or something, I don't know. This film opens up with a word of warning, saying that this film is nothing like anything you have seen before, and that it'll deeply disturb you and it might even terrify you. This film is pretty tame to today's standards, but I feel like that this little warning is effective because, well, it builds this anticipation and, I guess, morbid curiosity towards this film. They built this film up as the scariest movie ever made at its time. I would argue that there are silent films that are scarier than this. But this little scene builds up the expectations. It builds up suspense and anticipation. Colin Clive is also excellent as Dr. Frankenstein. He is the perfect mad scientist archetype. You want to believe his word. You can feel how passionate he is towards his work and how much he believes that what he is doing will better mankind. But his methods are just such a violation of nature that his experiment will inevitably fail, and you feel kind of conflicted on this guy. The set design to this film is oh so fantastic, especially Frankenstein's lab. There's a lot of mystery billowing through this lab. Like, you don't even know what almost all the equipment is used for. For all you know, all this equipment could be weird devices of torture. Even how Frankenstein made this monster, the process is kind of shrouded in mystery. You don't know what type of witchcraft he used. I mean, it's pretty evident that this film he used scientific methods to build this monster, but still, you have no idea what he did. All you see is the monster rise up, lightning strike, and then boom, he's alive. Honestly, I love it when movies leave things to the imagination. I have said that time and time again, and I will continue saying this time and time again. The reason why Frankenstein's experiment goes wrong isn't the abnormal brain. I believe it's because of how society brands his creation. They brand him as a monster, and that kind of gets to his head, and well, he becomes a monster. If you poke a bear with a stick, of course it's going to attack. I sometimes wonder if Fritz, Frankenstein's assistant, never tormented the monster, would he have gone evil? Would he have become the monster that society had branded him? But ultimately, it is very clear that society wasn't going to accept this creation. So his fate was already doomed from the beginning, and that's kind of sad, because you can see from one scene that the monster does have humanity. He isn't purely a monster, and that's of course in the incredibly tragic scene with the little girl. In this scene, the monster meets this little girl, and this little girl is the only person in this movie that accepts the monster as, well, a person and not a monster. This little girl brings out an innocent side to the monster, and you finally get to see some joy in his face. But unfortunately, this scene ends in tragedy. The monster wanted to see if the little girl would float with the flowers, but of course that doesn't work out, and he ends up killing her. This scene was cut in the theatrical version of this film because the studio thought it was too disturbing, but it was added in home video releases, and this edition really adds a lot of depth to the monster, even though it's a pretty short scene. This film is actually pretty short, with only a runtime of about an hour, and this film is just so concise. It gets to the point perfectly. There's no unnecessary additional subplots. It doesn't have time to cut around the bush. This short runtime forces this film to get to the point, and this film is very straight to the point. It gets its point across in its very short runtime. And I have to say, that is pretty impressive. And also, with this short runtime, you can easily marathon through a lot of the Universal monster movies, like this and Dracula, or the fantastic sequel, Bride of Frankenstein. I do have some minor issues with this film. They are a little bit nitpicky, but they are, I guess, plot holes. When Frankenstein's assistant, Fritz, goes and fetches him a brain, he gets an abnormal brain rather than a normal brain. This is because, well, he dropped the normal brain. When creating the monster, how didn't Frankenstein notice that the brain was abnormal? All he had to do was just read the label on the jar. Also, the scene where Fritz attacks the monster, it feels out of nowhere, since he had been working with Frankenstein all this time, and now he decides that he despises his creation? And also, at the very end of this movie, when Frankenstein falls off the windmill, and he even violently hits one of the little turbines or whatever, that should have killed him. But honestly, this little plot hole does create the sequel, Bride of Frankenstein. So if this plot hole didn't exist, we wouldn't have gotten Bride of Frankenstein. So this doesn't really bother me. And also the abnormal brain does create a pretty good joke, and one of my favorite jokes from the movie Young Frankenstein. Overall, Frankenstein is a classic and a staple of the horror genre. I always make sure to give this film a watch every October. And because of that, Frankenstein gets a B+. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed my review of Frankenstein. And if you did, make sure to give this video a like. And if you want more content like this, hit the subscribe button and ring the bell notification so you can be notified every time I upload a new video. And shout out to Quisp Cereal and Adam Sandler. Thanks for watching.